Hey channel family, what I'm about to tell you today changed my life forever, and I need to share it because I know many of you have gone through something similar. I'm Gabriel, 48 years old, and for most of my adult life I served as a priest at St. Jude's Parish. It was a vibrant working-class community, filled with good, honest people whom I loved and served with every fiber of my being. My days were spent helping others, guiding them in faith, and finding joy in the simple acts of kindness that define a true congregation. I believed in the goodness of humanity and the unwavering justice of God, a belief that was about to be tested in the cruelest way imaginable. In today's story, you'll discover how I, a man dedicated to God and His people, was publicly stripped of everything I held dear, framed by a corrupt bishop named Valerius for a crime I didn't commit, and how I found strength not in bitterness, but in my unwavering faith, to fight back with an intelligent, undeniable truth that would shake the very foundations of our diocese. This isn't just my story, it's a testament to how God's light can expose even the darkest corners of deception, even when you feel utterly lost and alone. It's about standing firm when the world turns its back. The day it all shattered was a Sunday, during the solemn Mass, a moment usually filled with peace and spiritual reflection. Bishop Valerius, a man whose ambition always seemed to outweigh his piety, dramatically interrupted the service. His voice, usually so smooth and authoritative, was laced with a feigned sorrow that made my stomach churn even before he spoke the words that would destroy my life. He announced to the stunned congregation that the weekly church offerings, sacred funds meant for God's work and kept in the sacristy safe, had been stolen. Then, without a shred of investigation, without even looking me in the eye, he pointed a condemning finger directly at me, proclaiming, "It grieves me deeply to announce that the sacred funds meant for God's work have been pilfered, and with a heavy heart I must name the one we trusted most, Father Gabriel." Gasps and whispers filled the air, like a wave of cold water washing over me. I stood there, utterly blindsided, heartbroken, and completely innocent, trying to defend myself. But my pleas were swallowed by the bishop's powerful, deceitful pronouncements. I was immediately suspended, publicly humiliated, and escorted from the church, my life, my calling, shattered in an instant, leaving me branded as a thief. Listen to my story to the end, and tell me, what would you have done in my place? What would you do when everything you believed in crumbles around you, and the very people you served turn their backs? Listen to this story to the end, and tell me, what would you have done in my place? That Sunday, the air in St. Jude's was thick with anticipation, but not for spiritual reflection. A cold dread settled over me as Bishop Valerius, usually so polished, interrupted the sacred Mass with a performance of feigned sorrow that turned my stomach. I knew, deep down, something terrible was coming. The way he paused, his eyes sweeping over the congregation, it was like a predator sizing up its prey, and I was unknowingly caught in his sights. His words, delivered with a chilling theatricality, cut through the silence like a knife. He spoke of stolen sacred funds, meant for God's work, pilfered from our sacristy safe. Then, his gaze locked onto mine, and his finger, long and accusing, pointed directly at me. "It grieves me deeply to announce, I must name the one we trusted most, Father Gabriel." The accusation resonated through the hushed church, a public execution of my character, an act of sheer, calculated malice. My mind reeled. A profound shock washed over me, a physical blow that stole my breath and voice. I tried to speak, to defend myself, to shout my innocence, but no sound escaped my throat. My pleas were just silent whispers against the thunder of his deceitful pronouncements, swallowed whole by the gasps and murmurs that rippled through the stunned faces of my beloved parishioners. My world, my calling, everything I dedicated my life to crumbled in that horrifying instant. The humiliation was immediate and absolute. I was suspended on the spot, stripped of my vestments, and escorted from the altar like a common criminal. Each step felt heavy, dragging me further from the life I knew, further from the people I had served with every fiber of my being. The faces of my flock, once filled with trust and affection, were now a blur of shock, confusion, and even judgment, staring as I was led away. That moment changed everything. It wasn't just a suspension, it was a crucifixion of my reputation, a public branding as a thief that left an indelible mark. My life, once centered on faith and service, was shattered beyond recognition. There was no turning back from that point, no easy path to recovery. Only a gaping wound of injustice, demanding a response, igniting a fire I never knew I possessed. Before that crushing Sunday, my life was a tapestry woven with threads of faith, service, and genuine connection. I was Gabriel, a man in his late 40s, and for most of my adult years I found profound purpose as a priest at St. Jude's Parish. It wasn't about grand ceremonies or lofty titles. It was about the everyday acts of kindness, the shared laughter, and the quiet comfort I could offer to my community. My roots were humble, growing up in a small, tight-knit family where faith was the cornerstone of our existence. We didn't have much in terms of worldly possessions, but we had an abundance of love and a deep reverence for God. Even as a young boy, I felt a pull towards something greater, a quiet whisper in my heart urging me towards service, a path that felt both natural and inevitable. As I navigated my teenage years, life presented its share of challenges. There were times of financial strain, moments of doubt, and the usual struggles of finding one's place in the world. But through it all, my faith remained my anchor. It taught me resilience, the importance of compassion, and the unwavering belief that God's plan, though sometimes mysterious, was always just. The decision to pursue the priesthood wasn't a sudden revelation, but a gradual unfolding of my purpose. It was a calling that solidified after years of prayer and reflection, a commitment I embraced with an open heart and a determined spirit. I knew it wouldn't be an easy path, but the thought of dedicating my life to God and His people filled me with an unmatched sense of peace and direction. My years in seminary were demanding, a period of intense study and spiritual formation. I delved deep into Scripture, theology, and the history of our faith, not just to gain knowledge, but to truly understand the essence of Christ's teachings. It was a time of profound personal growth, shaping me into the man and priest I aspired to be, ready to serve with both intellect and spirit. After ordination, my first assignment was a small, rural parish, far from the bustling city. It was there I learned the practicalities of ministry, the joys of guiding a congregation, and the humbling experience of truly walking alongside people in their triumphs and sorrows. Those early years taught me patience and the immense power of a listening ear and a comforting word. Then came St. Jude's, a vibrant, working-class community that quickly became my home, my family. I arrived as a new priest, eager to serve, and was welcomed with open arms. The people were honest, hard-working, and fiercely devoted, and I poured my heart into becoming the shepherd they deserved, building a bond of trust that felt unbreakable. My personality as a priest was, I believe, quite simple. I wasn't one for grand sermons or complex theological debates. I spoke plainly, from the heart, focusing on the everyday application of God's love and wisdom. I tried to be approachable, a good listener, someone who could share a laugh or offer a prayer, making faith feel real and accessible to everyone. My days were a simple rhythm of service, morning prayers, visiting the sick, counseling parishioners, preparing sermons, and celebrating Mass. I found immense joy in these routines, in the quiet conversations after service, in the children's laughter during Sunday school. These were the simple, profound moments that truly defined my existence and brought me closer to God. The bonds I forged with my parishioners were deep and genuine. They weren't just faces in the pews. They were friends, confidants, a true spiritual family. Their trust in me was a sacred responsibility, something I guarded fiercely. We built that community together, brick by brick, prayer by prayer, creating a haven of faith and mutual support. My unwavering faith in Jesus Christ was the bedrock of my entire existence. It guided every decision, every word, every action. I believed in the inherent goodness of humanity, and more importantly, in the ultimate justice of God. This faith wasn't just a doctrine. It was a living, breathing force that sustained me through every challenge, big or small. Because of this dedication, my reputation within St. Jude's and the wider diocese was one of integrity and devotion. I was known as a man of God, trustworthy and kind, a pillar of moral strength for the community. This wasn't something I sought, but a natural outcome of living my calling with sincerity and an open heart, earning respect through consistent service. My personal life was modest. I had few possessions, no grand ambitions for wealth or power. My rectory was a simple home, filled with books and the quiet hum of reflection. My treasures were not material but spiritual, the smiles of my parishioners, the solace I could offer, the shared moments of grace that illuminated my days. Everything I held dear. My world, once a sanctuary of purpose and peace, crumbled into dust the moment Bishop Valerius's finger pointed at me. The very ground beneath my feet felt like it gave way, sending me spiraling into an abyss I never imagined. Stripped of my priestly vestments, I was no longer Father Gabriel, shepherd of St. Jude's, but merely Gabriel, a man accused, publicly disgraced. The sacred calling that had defined my existence for decades was ripped away, leaving a gaping void where my identity once stood firm. This wasn't just a professional setback. It was a complete erasure of who I was, a profound loss that shook me to my core. The rectory, my simple home for years, became a place I was forbidden to enter. My meager personal belongings, a few books, some worn clothes, were hastily packed into boxes by strangers, then unceremoniously dumped outside. Suddenly, I was homeless, adrift in the city I had served, with nowhere to go. The irony was a bitter pill. A man who had preached charity and compassion now found himself utterly dependent, without a roof over his head. The cold reality of destitution hit me with a force far greater than any sermon could describe, stripping away even the illusion of security. To add insult to injury, my small personal savings, accumulated carefully over years of modest living, were immediately seized. They called it restitution for the stolen funds, a cruel twist of fate that left me utterly destitute. Every penny I had was taken, leaving me with nothing but the clothes on my back and a heart heavy with injustice. It was a calculated move, designed not just to punish, but to completely disempower me, to ensure I had no means to fight back or even survive. My financial stability, however minimal, vanished in an instant, leaving me vulnerable and exposed. My reputation, once a source of quiet pride and earned respect within the community, was utterly annihilated overnight. Decades of selfless service, of comforting the grieving and guiding the lost, were erased by a single, malicious lie. I became a pariah, whispered about in hushed tones, pointed at with scorn. The name, Father Gabriel, which once brought comfort, now evoked suspicion and contempt. This destruction of my good name was, in many ways, more painful than the material losses, because it attacked the very essence of my character and integrity. The faces of my parishioners, once filled with trust and affection, now held a chilling mix of shock, confusion, and outright judgment. Many turned away, unable to meet my gaze, their silence a louder condemnation than any shouted accusation. Others, fueled by the bishop's deceitful words, openly expressed their disgust. The community I had poured my heart into, the people I considered my spiritual family, seemed to fracture around me, leaving me isolated in a sea of suspicion. It felt like watching my own funeral, while still very much alive to feel the pain. The humiliation of my new reality was constant. I, who once offered guidance and solace, now struggled to find even the simplest work. Every door I approached was slammed shut, the shadow of the accusation preceding me. The simple act of buying food or finding a place to sleep became a monumental struggle, a daily reminder of my disgraced status. It was a profoundly dehumanizing experience, stripping away not just my profession, but my basic human dignity, making me question how I could possibly move forward from such a crushing blow. Public taunts became a regular soundtrack to my new existence. I couldn't walk down a street without hearing whispers, often followed by outright shouts of "thief," from strangers, and even former acquaintances. Children, once eager to greet Father Gabriel, were now pulled away by their parents, their innocent faces replaced by fear or confusion. Each taunt, each whispered insult, was a fresh wound, a constant reinforcement of the false narrative that had been woven around me. The weight of this public shame was almost unbearable. Local tabloids, hungry for scandal, feasted on my downfall. My name, once associated with piety, was now splashed across headlines, smeared with accusations of sacrilege and betrayal. They painted me as a corrupt hypocrite, a wolf in sheep's clothing, and every article twisted the truth further, cementing the lie in the public consciousness. Reading those sensationalized stories felt like watching my character being systematically dismantled, piece by agonizing piece, with no voice to defend myself against the relentless onslaught of slander. The search for any kind of work became a grueling, soul-crushing ordeal. My resume, once a testament to years of dedicated service, was now a liability, instantly raising red flags. Who would hire a publicly accused thief, especially one branded by the church itself? Each rejection was a fresh sting, a stark reminder that my past, my calling, had been weaponized against me, making it impossible to earn an honest living. The world seemed determined to keep me trapped in this pit of despair, with no escape. The physical toll of this ordeal was immense. Sleepless nights spent on park benches or in shelters, combined with the constant gnawing anxiety, left me perpetually exhausted. My body ached, my spirit felt heavy, and the simple act of breathing sometimes felt like a monumental effort. The stress etched lines on my face, making me look far older than my years, a visible manifestation of the inner turmoil that raged within me. I was a shadow of my former self, physically and mentally drained. Emotionally, the initial shock had given way to a profound, searing pain of betrayal, not just by Valerius, but by the system, by the very institution I had served with unwavering loyalty. The humiliation was a constant companion, gnawing at my self-worth, making me feel small and utterly powerless. It was a deep, aching wound in my soul, a betrayal that cut far deeper than any physical injury ever could, leaving me hollowed out and reeling. But amidst the despair, a flicker, a tiny ember of something else began to stir within me. It wasn't just sorrow anymore, it was a slow, burning rage, a righteous indignation that simmered beneath the surface of my grief. How could such blatant injustice be allowed to stand? How could a man of God be so cruelly framed, his life destroyed, for the ambition of another? This anger, initially a destructive force, slowly began to morph into something more, something focused and determined. One particularly humiliating moment stands out vividly in my memory. I was walking past what used to be my favorite bakery, a place where parishioners would often greet me with warm smiles. A man, whom I vaguely recognized as a former altar server, spotted me. His eyes narrowed, filled with contempt, and then, without a word, he spat directly at my feet, snarling, "Thief!" The spittle landed with a sickening splat, a public degradation that cemented my status as an outcast, leaving me frozen in shame. In those dark days I felt utterly alone, abandoned by almost everyone. The few who offered a kind word did so in secret, afraid of being associated with me, afraid of the bishop's wrath. Most simply vanished from my life, their absence a silent testament to how quickly loyalty can evaporate under the heat of scandal. This isolation was a heavy burden, making the world feel cold and indifferent, reinforcing the notion that I was truly on my own in this fight. The bitterest pill was watching Bishop Valerius continue to prosper, his public image seemingly untarnished. He paraded his piety, his sermons now filled with veiled references to moral failings and the need for spiritual vigilance, clearly aimed at me. His grand plans for the diocese went forward, funded by the very offerings he had stolen, while I lived in squalor. The stark contrast between his flourishing deception and my crumbling reality fueled the fire of injustice within me. Everywhere I turned, I was treated like a failure, a stain on the community, a man who had squandered his calling. The pity in some eyes was almost as painful as the contempt in others, both confirming that my worth had been utterly diminished. I was no longer seen as a spiritual leader, but as a cautionary tale, a broken vessel. This constant degradation chipped away at my spirit, but also, paradoxically, strengthened a growing resolve not to let them win. The loss of my ability to serve, to offer Mass, to pray publicly in a church felt like a spiritual amputation. My connection to God, once so vibrant and immediate through my ministry, now felt distant, obscured by the clouds of injustice. I missed the quiet reverence of the sanctuary, the shared hymns, the simple act of blessing. It was as if my spiritual home had been violently taken from me, leaving me adrift without my most cherished practices. In those lonely moments, my faith was tested like never before. I wrestled with God, asking why He would allow such an injustice to befall one of His devoted servants. Doubt, a venomous serpent, tried to coil around my heart, whispering cynical questions. Yet, even in the depths of my despair, a faint echo of Romans chapter 12, verse 21, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good," resonated, a subtle reminder of the path I still believed in. There were very few rays of light. An old woman, a former parishioner, once secretly left a warm meal outside a shelter I frequented. Her eyes filled with unspoken sympathy. These rare clandestine acts of kindness were fleeting, but they were enough to keep a tiny ember of hope alive, a whisper that not everyone had forsaken me. They reminded me that genuine goodness still existed, even in the darkest corners of my new, harsh reality. The weight of carrying the false accusation was an invisible, suffocating cloak. It colored every interaction, every thought, every moment of my waking life. It wasn't just a lie. It was a burden that pressed down on my soul, threatening to crush me completely. The injustice wasn't just an event. It became my constant companion, a heavy shadow that followed my every move, making simple existence a profound struggle. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the despair began to transform. The helpless anger gave way to a cold, hard determination. I realized that simply enduring this suffering wasn't enough. My faith, though wounded, refused to break. God's justice, I knew, was unwavering, even if human justice had failed me so spectacularly. A new resolve began to take root. A quiet but firm decision that this could not, would not, be the end of my story. There was a turning point, a moment of clarity amidst the fog of my pain. It wasn't a grand revelation, but a quiet, internal shift. I understood that allowing Valerius's lie to define me would be a greater betrayal than any he had committed. My life, my calling, my very being, deserved more than to be extinguished by another man's greed. This realization sparked a fire, transforming my victimhood into a nascent resolve to fight. A seed of an idea, faint at first, began to sprout in my mind. It wasn't about revenge in the petty sense, but about truth and justice. It was about clearing my name, not just for myself, but for the integrity of the faith I still cherished, and for the community that had been misled. This wasn't about vengeance born of bitterness, but a deep, unyielding need to right a terrible wrong, to expose the darkness for what it truly was. My faith, though severely tested, did not break. Instead, it deepened, taking on a new, more resilient form. I understood that overcoming evil sometimes required more than just passive endurance. In those dark days, when every door was shut and my future seemed to vanish, a small, quiet memory stirred within me. It was about the simple audio recorder I used to keep in the sacristy, a mundane device I'd used to archive my sermons, capturing my thoughts and reflections for later use. I had completely forgotten about it in the chaos of my public disgrace, but now, a faint flicker of hope, a gentle whisper, brought it back to mind. It was a long shot, but what else did I have left to lose? Among the few personal items I managed to salvage, a worn Bible, a favorite prayer book, and a couple of tattered shirts, there was a small box. With trembling hands, I rummaged through it, my heart pounding with a mix of desperate hope and profound skepticism. And there it was, nestled beneath a pile of old letters. A small, unassuming black device, no bigger than the palm of my hand. It looked utterly insignificant, a relic from a life that felt a million miles away. Picking it up, the weight of it in my hand felt strangely profound. It was just a recorder, a piece of plastic and metal, yet something about it sparked a tiny flame of possibility within me. I remembered leaving it on, a habit born of absent-mindedness more than intention. Could it be? Could something so simple, so easily overlooked, hold a key to unlocking the truth, to shedding light on the darkness that had consumed my world? I found a quiet corner in the shelter, away from the prying eyes and judgmental whispers, and pressed the play button. The static hummed for a moment. Then my own voice, clear and strong, filled the air, reciting a sermon from weeks before. I listened, my mind drifting back to simpler times, to the peace of the sacristy before my life was so cruelly upended. It was a painful reminder of what I had lost, yet I continued to listen, almost out of a melancholic nostalgia. Then the sermon ended, and for a few agonizing seconds there was silence. Just as I was about to give up, to dismiss this fleeting hope as another cruel trick of fate, other voices emerged from the recording. Faint at first, then growing clearer, I recognized them instantly. Bishop Valerius and Monsignor Thorne. My blood ran cold, a mix of disbelief and a sickening certainty washing over me. They were talking, their voices low, conspiratorial. The words that followed were like a punch to the gut, yet also a lifeline thrown in the darkest depths. I heard them discussing the stolen offerings, not as a crime to be solved, but as a deliberate act they themselves had orchestrated. Then the full horror unfolded, their meticulous plan to frame me, Father Gabriel, the trusted priest, to cover up their own massive embezzlement scheme. Their motives laid bare greed, ambition, and a ruthless desire to consolidate power within the diocese. My mind reeled. It wasn't just an accusation anymore. It was a cold, calculated betrayal, recorded for all to hear. Bishop Valerius, the man who had publicly condemned me, was the true thief, the master manipulator. The recording was raw, undeniable, a testament to their corruption. A profound shock washed over me, followed by a surge of righteous indignation that burned hotter than any anger I had ever known. God, I realized, had provided. Valerius, in his arrogance and hunger for power, had never once considered such a simple, insignificant detail. He saw me as a naive, trusting priest, easily dismissed, a pawn in his grand scheme. He believed I would simply vanish, broken and silenced, without the intelligence or the means to ever fight back. His oversight, his complete underestimation of my spirit, and the quiet power of truth would prove to be his greatest undoing. In that moment, listening to their deceitful voices, something within me shifted irrevocably. The broken man, consumed by despair and humiliation, began to transform. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was an instrument of truth, a vessel for divine justice. The Holy Spirit, I believed, had guided my hand to that recorder, had preserved that evidence, turning a mundane habit into a powerful weapon against injustice. This wasn't about bitterness or petty revenge. It was about something far greater. It was about clearing my name, yes, but more importantly, it was about restoring integrity to the faith I still cherished, about exposing the darkness that had festered within the very heart of our diocese. God's truth, I knew with unwavering certainty, would prevail. He had provided me with the undeniable proof, the means to overcome evil with good, just as Romans chapter 12 verse 21 teaches. Bishop Valerius had seen me as a simple priest, perhaps a bit too trusting, too focused on my flock to pose any real threat to his ambitions. He saw my humility as weakness, my faith as naivete. He couldn't fathom that a man of God, one so dedicated to peace, could possess the quiet resolve, the strategic mind, or the spiritual fortitude to meticulously unravel his web of lies and expose his corruption to the world. My connection to Jesus Christ, though severely tested by the profound injustice, now fueled my moral fortitude in a way I hadn't experienced before. This hidden recording wasn't just evidence, it was a revelation, a clear sign that God's light could indeed penetrate even the darkest corners of deception. It gave me the strength to fight, not with anger alone, but with a deep, unyielding conviction that truth would ultimately set me free. This simple, forgotten device became the cornerstone of my recovery, the unexpected advantage that turned the tide. It transformed my despair into a focused determination, providing a concrete path forward. I understood then that my journey wasn't over. It was merely entering a new, challenging, but ultimately righteous phase. I had the truth, and with God's guidance, I would ensure it was heard. The antagonist, Valerius, never imagined that the quiet priest he so easily discarded possessed the resilience or the divine insight to uncover such a damning secret. He thought his power absolute, his deception foolproof, but he had forgotten the power of a tiny, silent witness, and the unwavering faith of a man determined to walk in God's light, even when surrounded by the deepest shadows. This was the turning point. The victim was gone, replaced by a man with a purpose, armed with undeniable proof and an unshakable belief in divine justice. The game was no longer about survival. It was about strategy, truth, and the unwavering conviction that God would guide my hand in exposing the darkness. I had the means to fight back, not with violence, but with an intelligent, undeniable truth. Before I reveal how this vengeance unfolded, it's very important that you subscribe to the channel and leave a like on the video so that YouTube recommends this incredible story to more people. This way, you help us spread the gospel through real testimonies, so please help us in this noble cause. After discovering the recording, I knew I had to disappear, at least for a while. Father Gabriel, the trusting priest, had to become someone else, someone invisible and strategic, operating silently in the background. I spent countless nights in the public library, devouring books on forensic accounting, legal precedents for church fraud, and even the intricate bylaws of our own diocese. It was a steep learning curve, a completely different kind of study than theology, but my purpose was clear. God had given me this undeniable truth, and it was my duty to use it. I also began to study Bishop Valerius himself, his public appearances, his financial statements, looking for any crack in his carefully constructed facade, understanding that exposing him required more than just the recording. My intimate knowledge of the diocese built over decades became my greatest asset. I started sending anonymous, untraceable tips to influential donors, and even a few high-ranking church officials I knew were quietly disillusioned with Valerius's lavish spending. These tips didn't mention the stolen offerings directly. Instead, they subtly highlighted other financial irregularities, questionable expenditures, and inflated budgets for Valerius's pet projects. It was a slow burn, designed to erode his credibility from within, making people question his judgment long before the main blow. Meanwhile, I taught myself basic digital forensics, enhancing the audio quality of the recording, isolating voices, and creating multiple secure backups to ensure its integrity could never be questioned. Finding a powerful ally was crucial, and Maria, a cynical but brilliant investigative journalist, was exactly who I needed. She dismissed my initial outreach, seeing me as just another desperate, disgraced priest with a wild story. But I persisted, sending her an encrypted message with a tantalizing, unedited snippet of the recording. Just a few seconds of Valerius's voice discussing the problem of Gabriel and the funds. Her initial skepticism turned to intrigue, then to a burning desire for truth. She saw the story not just as a local scandal, but as a systemic abuse of power, a betrayal of faith. She became my conduit to the outside world, my voice where I had none. Together, Maria and I embarked on a relentless mission to build an irrefutable case. My recording was the bedrock, but Maria's journalistic prowess unearthed layers of corruption I could never have found alone. We meticulously documented Valerius's lavish lifestyle, his unexplained trips, the shell corporations he used to funnel church funds into personal accounts, and the quiet threats he'd made to those who questioned him. We cross-referenced financial statements, interviewed disgruntled former employees anonymously, and pieced together a comprehensive dossier that painted a picture of systemic greed and abuse. Every detail was double-checked, every piece of evidence authenticated, ensuring no loophole remained. The time for subtlety was over. It was time for the first strike. With Maria's extensive connections, we orchestrated the ultimate strategic leak. We sent the tantalizing snippet of the recording, along with a condensed version of our damning dossier detailing Valerius's broader corruption and financial crimes, to a national news network known for its uncompromising investigative reporting. It wasn't a full reveal, but a carefully crafted preview, designed to create an undeniable buzz and force a public investigation. This move was irreversible. Once the information was out, there was no turning back. It was our point of no return, trusting in God's plan and Maria's skill to manage the fallout and ensure the story gained traction. The world tuned in for the live, nationally televised diocesan conference, where Bishop Valerius, radiating false piety, was set to announce his grand new fundraising initiative, believing he was untouchable. But as he began his polished speech, the broadcast dramatically flickered, then cut to me. I stood there, no longer the broken priest, but Gabriel, resolute and calm, looking directly into the camera. For the first time, the full, unedited recording of Valerius and Thorne's conspiratorial conversation, their voices chillingly clear, played for millions. The truth, raw and undeniable, filled the airwaves, exposing their heinous deception, their greed, and their calculated framing of an innocent man. Valerius's face on the broadcast contorted in a horrifying mask of disbelief and pure terror as his world crumbled before his eyes. The applause for his speech died, replaced by stunned silence, then outrage. Within hours, he was publicly disgraced, stripped of his title, humiliated beyond measure, and arrested on multiple counts of embezzlement, fraud, and slander. Monsignor Thorne, his accomplice, also faced swift justice. My name was unequivocally cleared, my reputation restored. I didn't return to the priesthood. My path had changed. I found a new calling, advocating for truth and integrity within religious institutions, a secular spiritual guide. As they led Valerius away in handcuffs, I spoke into the camera, my voice firm. The truth, like light, cannot be hidden forever. For even the deepest darkness can be overcome by a single righteous flame.